A small farmer already weighed down by years of hardship found 5 hikers lost and worn thin under the afternoon sun. He gave them food, water, and quiet shelter, never asking for anything in return. But just hours later, a court-martial arrived, delivering a legal notice that summoned him to federal court. Whatever waited in that courtroom could be the end of everything he held on to, and the start of something he never saw coming. Hi, and welcome to Unraveled Whispers. It's time for another story, one that says more than it seems. Steve Walker had worked this land for over 25 years, a narrow stretch of farmland tucked between the forested ridgelines and winding hollows of western North Carolina. His farm sat alone at the end of a gravel road, where hikers sometimes wandered through, drawn by quiet trails and the kind of silence you don't find in cities anymore. A small side table near the porch chairs held 2 unopened envelopes, the kind with state seals and printed labels that didn't need reading. One was property tax, same as last month. The other, tucked beneath it, was another inspection result. Second test in weeks. Still no clearance to sell. Without certification, his crops couldn't be delivered to vendors or listed at the co-op market. Not legally anyway. The soil hadn't been right lately. Dust blew in thicker than usual, clinging to the plants and settling deep into the ground. He didn't need tests to know something had changed. His vegetables were coming out lighter, thinner, and last season's harvest had barely broken even. That morning, Steve was tightening a fence near the western edge of his land when he heard voices, faint and broken, carried on the dry wind. He paused, squinting toward the far stretch of his property. No truck, no engine, just scattered words. Human. Strange this far out. Most hikers stayed on the marked trail, 5 miles east. Locals knew better than to cut through private land, especially under this kind of heat. He wiped his hands on his jeans, climbed onto the old ATV, and followed the slope around the irrigation trench. Just past the windmill, he spotted them. 5 figures slumped beneath a juniper tree. Dusty clothes, flushed faces. One held an empty water bottle like it might fill itself. He cut the engine and called out, "You folks all right?" The woman looked up first. Her face was flushed, sun-pinked but calm. "We lost the trail yesterday," she said. "Thought we could find a shortcut back, but it got worse the farther we went." A man beside her nodded, lips cracked. "We've been walking since this morning. Nothing but ridge and dry brush." Steve studied them. Their gear was basic. Day packs, tennis shoes, no real supplies. City folks, most likely. Maybe an office group on a team hike that went wrong. "You had water?" Steve asked. "We rationed it. Last sip was this morning," one of the men replied, voice dry and brittle. Steve didn't ask more, just nodded and gestured behind him. "Come on, I'm not far. Got shade, cold water, maybe something to eat." They didn't argue. One of the women helped a man to his feet while another leaned against a boulder, gathering strength before slowly rising. They all moved like their bodies were close to giving out. "I'll take 2 on the ATV," Steve said. "The rest can follow the dirt path. It's a short walk." He glanced at the woman who looked the most alert. "You all right to walk?" She gave a slow nod, brushing sweat from her forehead. "We'll manage." As he drove toward the house, Steve looked back through the dust trail. The group moved quietly, carefully, like the heat had drained not just their strength, but their words. He didn't know who they were. Tourists, hikers, maybe co-workers on a retreat. But he didn't need to know. They needed help, and that was enough. The ATV rolled to a slow stop near the porch. Steve stepped off and helped the 2 hikers down, their legs stiff, boots coated in dust. The others reached the yard a few minutes later, silent and sun-worn. By then, Brenda, Steve's wife, had stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on a dishcloth. "They all right?" she asked, already heading down the steps. "Lost their way. No water left," Steve said. "One of them's banged up a little." Brenda didn't wait for more. She opened the screen door wide. "Come on in. Shade's better than heroics in this heat." They settled onto the porch chairs, grateful for the break. Brenda returned with a pitcher of cool water, clean cups, and a small first aid box. She crouched beside the man with the scratched knee, cleaned the cut gently, and passed out bandages. "Take it slow," she said as they sipped. "Heat like this sneaks up on you." "Thank you," said the youngest, adjusting the strap of her pack. We weren't sure we'd find anyone this far out. Brenda offered a tired smile. Not much out here anymore. She stepped back inside and reappeared with a tray of sandwiches, apple slices, and a bottle of electrolyte drink. Something bright and citrus-colored that looked like it belonged in a sports ad. Eat, she said. Don't argue. They didn't. Hunger and thirst made stronger cases than manners ever could. Between bites, names came out. Anthony, William, Olivia, Mark, and Emma. A hiking loop gone wrong. Claire pointed to her map and traced where they thought they'd been. Steve studied it briefly, then pointed a calloused finger to the north. Trail's 6 miles that way. You were walking the wrong ridge. Emma blinked. We were that far off? Rocks around here lied to you, Steve said. The hikers chuckled, but their shoulders stayed slouched, worn from the sun and missteps. Mark stood and stretched, gazing out over the field. Is that your land? Steve gave a nod. What's left of it, he replied, the words flat, but something in his tone gave them weight. Behind the house, the fields looked tired. Rows of struggling vegetables, sunburnt and curling, stretched halfway before giving way to weeds. A little farther out sat a flat, cleared section of dirt, fenced off at the edges. From beyond the hills, a low industrial hum carried faintly on the wind. You're the only ones out here? Olivia asked, squinting at the vast empty stretch. Steve leaned against a porch post. Used to be other farms down the valley. Now it's just us. Most sold off years back. What's going on with all that? Mark asked, nodding toward the bare patch beyond the crops. Steve followed his gaze. Company's been drilling out there. Mineral extraction, I think. Said it wouldn't affect us. But things changed. He said it plainly without anger. Just a fact that had worn itself into his voice. Emma turned toward the rows of vegetables. Your crops, they don't look too happy, Brenda answered gently. They started wilting last year. Soil doesn't hold like it used to. Water's different too. William raised a brow. Still trying to grow through it? We try, Steve said. Not much gets cleared for market now. No one asked why. The answer sat in the brittle leaves, the silenced ground, the tone in their voices. Inside, the screen door creaked open as a warm gust stirred the room, fluttering a few papers on the table where Steve had set them down that morning. One slid slightly, the kind with a red property tax stamp across the top. Another showed the faded lettering of a failed soil inspection. Emma's gaze paused on them, reading just enough. Anthony saw them too. His mouth opened like he might ask, but he stopped himself. A quiet glance passed between the group, something unspoken but clear. Brenda, catching the movement, walked past and gently placed a small bowl on top of the stack to keep them still. Wind's always stirring things up, she said, more to herself than anyone else. A quiet settled over the hikers group, not heavy, just thoughtful. Olivia glanced toward the cleared patch. You never tried to fight what they were doing? Steve gave a slow nod, more to himself than to them. I have, he said quietly, but when the company came in, land prices spiked. That means taxes did too. Now we're paying more just to hold on, even when we're earning less. He gave a faint shrug. Some fights you don't take on when you're already carrying too many. The hikers were quiet. Emma looked at Olivia. Olivia glanced toward Anthony. William gave a slow exhale. There was something shared in those looks. Not pity, not surprise, just understanding. Quiet and real. Steve didn't notice. He stood and dusted his hands off. We'll pack you up something. That sun's not letting up anytime soon. From inside, Brenda returned with a few small bags. Bottles of water, a travel tube of sunscreen, some cheese wrapped in wax paper. We can pay you, Anthony said. You've done more than enough. Steve shook his head. We don't do this for money, just get back safe. The hikers slung their packs over their shoulders, pausing one last time before heading out. They looked at Steve and Brenda. Worn hands, kind eyes, tired porch. Nothing flashy, just people who had given more than they had to spare. They thanked them again and started down the trail Steve had pointed to. Sunscreen dabbed on sunburnt faces, packs heavier, but hearts lighter. Steve watched until they disappeared beyond the trees. He sat back down beside Brenda and reached for the glass of water he'd left untouched. Good people, he said. Brenda nodded, her eyes drifting to the table where the letters still waited. "Yeah," she said softly. "Real good." The afternoon grew quieter. Sunlight angled through the window above the sink, catching the rim of the dishes they hadn't yet put away. The hum of summer cicadas filled the silence between them. Brenda reached for the top envelope, the one with the red stamp on the corner. "We'll need to call the county office again," she said, not looking up. Steve rubbed the back of his neck. "They'll just tell us the same. Fix the soil, file an appeal, pay what we can't. They gave us 30 days last time. 28 now," he muttered. She slid the envelope back into the pile and let her hand rest on top of it. Neither of them said anything for a while. Outside, the breeze picked up. Not strong, just enough to stir the chimes again. A wind that brought no rain, only the scent of dry earth. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. Steve turned his head toward the window. A dark sedan pulled into the drive. Not a truck, not a neighbor's vehicle. Clean, unfamiliar. It came to a slow stop just beyond the gate. A man in a pale blue shirt and dark slacks stepped out. He wore a badge clipped to his pocket and carried a thick envelope, clasped flat against one palm. Steve rose and stepped onto the porch. "Steve Walker?" the man asked. "That's me." "I'm with the state marshal's office," the man said. "I have a legal notice for you." Steve's brow tightened. "What kind of notice?" "Can't say, sir. I'm just here to deliver." He held out the envelope, then added, "You're expected in federal court by next week." Steve took the envelope slowly. The man gave a polite nod. "You have a good day." He walked back to the car, started it, and drove off. Steve stood on the porch, the envelope still in his hands, unmoving for a long moment before stepping back inside. Brenda looked up as he entered. Her eyes went from his face to the papers. "What is it?" He sat down, peeled back the sealed flap, and unfolded the letter. It was printed on thick stock, the state seal pressed faintly into the corner. He read the first line aloud. "You are hereby summoned to appear before the United States District Court regarding matters under judicial review." Steve blinked. His hands didn't shake, but they tightened on the edge of the page. "Federal court?" Brenda echoed. "For what?" He didn't answer right away. He read the line again, then a third time, as if the words might change. "I don't know," he finally said. "We haven't done anything wrong." Brenda leaned closer, rereading over his shoulder. "You think, could it be Horizon? If it is, they're going about it strange. Could it be something with the land? Some kind of penalty? Maybe. Or—" He hesitated. He looked toward the window, the trail, the trees. "You don't think it has anything to do with those hikers, do you?" Brenda didn't answer right away. She sat down across from him, resting her hands on the table. "They were kind," she said at last. "Grateful. But you never really know." Steve gave a slow nod. "Still doesn't explain why the court would want anything to do with me." Brenda looked over at the envelope again. "We don't even have a lawyer, Steve. And the hearing's next week." "We don't have the money for one either," he said, not with anger. Just a plain truth he'd gotten used to saying. A pause settled between them, broken only by the soft ticking of the wall clock. On the table beside the unopened mail lay the legal notice, stamped and sealed in a way that made everything else feel small. The week passed slowly, every day thick with questions they couldn't answer. Steve didn't call anyone, didn't know who he'd even call. They just waited, tending the field by habit, eating dinner in silence, sleeping less. Then the morning came. Steve and Brenda arrived at the courthouse in Asheville, North Carolina. The building was tall, cold, and modern, glass walls and stone columns that made Steve feel small the second he stepped out of the truck. He smoothed his shirt with one hand and held the court notice in the other, folded into a perfect square. Brenda clutched her bag close to her chest, walking half a step behind him. They didn't speak. Inside, a clerk showed them into a courtroom. No jury box, no gallery, just a formal hearing room with rows of empty benches and polished wooden floors. A few lawyers were already seated near the front, murmuring quietly and reviewing papers. Steve's eyes scanned the room without recognition until 5 people stepped through the side doors, dressed in tailored suits and carrying sleek laptop bags. It was them, the same 5 hikers who'd knocked on his door weeks ago, sunburned, dusty, and lost in the hills, now stood before him, transformed. No backpacks, no trail shoes, just quiet, professional presence. Their suits were crisp, their expressions calm. Their eyes met his and held there, steady and sure. They nodded, not surprised to see him, but certain, like they were exactly where they were meant to be. Steve's mouth parted slightly. He looked to Brenda, then back again. Is that? Before he could finish, Emma stepped toward him. She stopped just a few feet away and spoke in a lowered, even tone. Mr. Walker, she said, we didn't say who we were that day, but we're attorneys with Hartwell Ridge LPP. We specialize in environmental and property rights law, and we filed a petition on your behalf against Horizon Minerals. Steve stared at her, unblinking. He didn't move. Brenda's hand tightened on his sleeve. You filed what? He said softly, his voice caught at the edge of disbelief. Mark stepped forward beside Emma. You helped us without asking anything in return, he said quietly. We couldn't forget that, Olivia added gently. We looked into your land, the soil reports, the failed inspections, the filings with the state board. What Horizon's been doing, it's unlawful. We had the means to take it forward. So we did. Brenda turned toward them, her voice barely above a whisper. You're representing us? It's the least we could do, Anthony said. Let us do for you what you did for us. Stand up, even when no one else would. William gave a small nod, stepping beside the others. You gave us water and shelter when we were lost. Now it's our turn. Steve opened his mouth, then closed it again. His fingers tightened around the folded court paper in his hand. No words came. The courtroom doors opened again. An older judge in a black robe stepped in and took her seat behind the bench. She adjusted her glasses, eyes moving steadily across the room. Her face showed no surprise, but there was a quiet attentiveness in her gaze, as if she understood more than she let on. Good morning, she said, addressing the room. We're here for the matter of Walker versus Horizon Minerals, case number 22, CV1148. Let's proceed. The hearing began, with Hartwell Ridge's team already leaning forward, their preparation clear in every movement. Emma opened with precise, confident arguments, presenting satellite imagery and state records they had gathered over the past several weeks. Mark followed with photos of newly formed runoff, channels, and drainage paths through the lower basin. Anthony laid out the soil inspection reports collected from certified labs and local inspectors. Olivia cited sections of the state's Agricultural Protection Act, linking Horizon's actions to direct legal violations. William brought in testimony from local water specialists and former inspectors, confirming what Steve had suspected for months. Horizon had diverted wastewater and chemicals into the surrounding fields and wells. No mitigation, no permits, no warning. Steve listened in silence, each word cutting deeper than the last. Hearing it aloud, what had happened to his farm was like watching someone read a disaster report about your own life. Horizon's lawyers tried to push back, claiming there was no intent to harm, that the runoff was incidental. They cited extreme weather, outdated maps, and vague language in prior compliance filings. But Hartwell Ridge didn't flinch. Emma countered with documented timelines and inconsistencies. Mark broke down environmental impact statements and violations line by line. Anthony tracked crop data and tied it to failing soil conditions. Olivia challenged the permits and drilled into Horizon's evasive filings. And William delivered the financial impact: lost income, failed certifications, the rising property taxes, and the replanting costs Steve had shouldered alone. They weren't just presenting a case. They were translating years of slow erosion into evidence, making sure every overlooked detail had a voice. They knew what Steve had endured, and piece by piece they made the court see it too. The courtroom doors opened again. An older judge in a black robe stepped in and took her seat behind the bench. She adjusted her glasses, eyes moving steadily across the room. Her face showed no surprise, but there was a quiet attentiveness in her gaze, as if she understood more than she let on. Good morning, she said, addressing the room. We're here for the matter of Walker versus Horizon Minerals, case number 22, CV1148. Let's proceed. The hearing began. Hartwell Ridge's team leaned forward, every movement sharp with preparation. Emma opened with confident, surgical arguments, satellite imagery, state records, clear timelines. Mark followed with photos showing runoff paths carved through the lower basin. Anthony laid out lab-tested soil reports from certified inspectors. Olivia cited the Agricultural Protection Act, linking Horizon's activities to direct legal violations. William added testimony from water specialists and former regulators, confirming what Steve had quietly feared for months. Chemicals and wastewater had been diverted into surrounding fields and wells. No mitigation, no permits, no warning. Hearing it laid out like that was like watching someone narrate a slow disaster you'd lived through. Horizon's lawyers pushed back. No intent to harm, just bad weather, outdated maps, vague filings. But Hartwell Ridge didn't blink. Emma countered with mapped timelines. Mark broke down impact reports line by line. Anthony tracked crop loss, tying it to declining soil health. Olivia challenged permits and flagged inconsistencies. William delivered the damage in numbers: lost income, failed certifications, rising property taxes, and the replanting costs Steve had borne alone. They weren't just arguing a case, they were giving years of quiet collapse a voice. And piece by piece, they made the court see what had been taken. Hours passed in a blur. Brenda sat close, her fingers intertwined with his. When the judge finally leaned forward, the courtroom went still. This court finds Horizon Minerals in violation of the Environmental Quality and Agricultural Protection Acts, the judge said. The company is ordered to cease all operations within 5 miles of the affected properties, pay $250,000 in direct compensation to Mr. Steve Walker for economic damages, and an additional $50,000 in punitive damages for failure to mitigate. Her gavel struck. Steve stood there for a long moment, still trying to catch up to what had just happened. Brenda squeezed his hand, but he barely felt it. Across the aisle, Emma and the others had begun to gather their folders and devices. It was done. As the proceedings wrapped up, Emma stepped over quietly. "We started building the case the day we left your farm," she said. "Didn't want to get your hopes up until we were sure." Anthony gave a nod. "Once we saw the filings and soil data, we knew it wasn't just bad luck. It was harm." Steve looked at them, still in disbelief, still piecing it together. But for the first time in months, he felt something close to steady. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps, microphones raised, cameras flashing, questions flying. But Steve stayed just inside the doors. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to," William said gently, resting a hand on his shoulder. Steve looked at him. "I don't think I have much to say, except thank you." Olivia gave a quiet smile. "You gave us water, shade, and kindness when we had nothing. This wasn't repayment. It was just right." Mark stepped closer. "That land of yours, don't let them take it. There's still good in it." Steve nodded slowly. He didn't say a word, just the faint lift of his chin, the kind that said he understood. Around him, the lawyers exchanged small nods of their own, then let him stand there a moment longer, in his own quiet victory. Over the next few months, things changed. The check came, along with a formal letter of apology from Horizon's legal team. More importantly, the runoff stopped. The wells ran clearer. Soil tests showed early signs of healing. Steve could walk the edge of the fields again without the sting in his eyes or the weight in his chest that came from wondering if it was all slipping away. He sent in samples again. This time, the results came back clean, certified. Local buyers returned. So did the color in the tomatoes, the firmness in the squash, the sweet snap of the beans. The land breathed again. Steve didn't stop there. With some of the settlement money, he purchased the unused plot up the ridge, acres of oak, cedar, and winding trails that had once belonged to a neighbor who'd retired out of state. And with a quiet nudge from Elena and Jared, the idea took root. A hiker's rest stop, rustic and open to anyone passing through. He didn't want cabins or brochures, just a clearing, a path, a shelter with a tin roof, and a trail map hand-sketched and tacked beneath an old lantern, a picnic bench, a barrel of apples in the fall, and a jar for donations, if folks had a few coins to spare. By early autumn, a small wooden sign appeared by the gravel road. Walker Hollow, Hiker Rest, and Farm Market. The lawyers came back once, late in the season. Not in suits this time, just in jeans and boots, sleeves rolled up, helping Steve set fence posts and string rope lights through the trees. They talked about adding a water station, maybe even a harvest booth next year, with cider, preserves, and sunflowers in a bucket by the gate. They stayed a while, sharing fresh vegetables and cold lemonade beneath the shelter Steve had built. It wasn't much, just a few benches, a table, and a trailhead marked with a hand-painted map. But it was more than enough. This time there was no hunger, no heat, no rush to find the way. Just shade, easy conversation, and quiet laughter. As the light softened, they hiked a short loop together, Steve and Brenda leading, the others close behind. The air was cool, the trail dry, and for the first time, the land felt fully alive again. Not just his, but something quietly shared, something lasting. If this story moved you, even in a quiet way, please take a moment to like, share it with someone who might need it, and most importantly, subscribe. Here at Unraveled Whispers, every story hides a little more than it tells. Check out more heartwarming videos on our channel, and thank you for spending time with us. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you in the next story.